Today I'm going to tell you about our recent trip to the Odeon Leicester Square to see one of the 32 70mm prints that was struck of Kenneth Branagh's Death on the Nile. It may not be 70mm as we once knew it, but at least it's confirmed one thing. There's nothing like the natural look of film when watching a film. This is the Odeon, and it is today the primary location for premiere screenings in the UK. It's an original picture palace, and after years in the doldrums throughout the 70s and 80s, it finally underwent restoration in the 1990s. Even the Leaping Lady sculptures from the original installation were replicated from photographs, and they have remained in place ever since. The last time I was here it still had traditional cinema seating, but today you are given reclining armchairs and plenty of space to spread out into. It really is quite luxurious today. Leicester Square has been a prime location for my cinema viewings throughout my life. The advantage of seeing films in the top cinemas here meant I got to see the premiere release prints, and so was rather spoiled in terms of the image quality that was shown. I saw many 70mm blow-ups from original 35mm camera negatives, and even they look special compared to standard 35mm release prints. With the arrival of Kenneth Branagh's Murder on the Orient Express on 4K disc, and it looking so unbelievably good, I could only wish that I'd ventured into Leicester Square to see that on 70mm, because it would, or should, have looked far superior to 4K. From what I've been told and what I've seen since, I'm now not entirely confident that will be the case, and it all comes down to how 70mm prints are produced today. I mentioned subscriber Oda in my last video, as we had been discussing what may be off with current 70mm prints as a result of my visit to see Death on the Nile. I had my suspicions, and Rhoda confirmed those suspicions before I'd even suggested them. I didn't think the methodology used to create the prints was quite as low a quality as Rhoda has learned, because I would have anticipated that the film industry would still attempt to do something special with the flagship of their industry, namely 70mm. It is possible that we are both wrong, of course, so if anyone in the industry responsible for jobs like this would like to come on this channel to correct me, then I'd love to hear from them. The upshot is that the opening of the new version of Death on the Nile contains English subtitles, and these subtitles are not the crystal clear clarity expected with 70mm. At first I thought the base of the projection was slightly out of focus, but looking carefully in this area confirmed this was not the case. There were sequences throughout the film that were not as I would have expected, particularly with what appear to be low-quality computer-generated images, but presumably these were compiled at 2K, and so vastly inferior to the rest of the product, but we simply have to accept that with modern filmmaking. But there were plenty of other scenes that simply didn't hold the 70mm clarity of days gone by. A lot of it still looked fabulous, and were it all of similar fabulous quality throughout, then I may not have been so alarmed. The traditional method of striking 70mm prints directly from the original camera negative is apparently no longer being utilised, and my suspicion was that Death on the Nile had been struck from the digital master. Rhoda confirmed this, but told me his understanding is that only a 4K master was used. Yes, a 4K. That sounds bad enough, but I think it is ever so slightly worse, because the prints for Death on the Nile clearly did not come directly from a computer master, as there was occasional neg dust evident on the print, and being as it's neg dust, this does seem to confirm that a negative has in fact been used. I do think Rhoda is correct though, and a computer master file of the film has been used. It's just that the master has been used to create a new negative, and it is that negative that has been used to strike the prints. Were that master to have been 8K, I think they would have gotten away with it. At this stage the evidence points to a 4K, but I don't know any of this for certain, and it is only my best attempt to work out quite why a 70mm release print of a film shot 65mm today does not look as it would have done had it have been released years ago. My recollection of previous 70mm screenings are somewhat different to this experience with Death on the Nile, so something has changed, and given the general dumbing down of image quality since the late 1990s, early 2000s, this new method of producing 70mm does seem to fit the bill. Having said all this, the 70mm print as it stands still has the unrivaled colour reproduction of film, the superior density, and the natural look that only film can offer, thanks in part to the random grain structure of prints. I would still opt to see a film print in a cinema ahead of the harsher look of modern video projection, however good that video projection may be today. So it's good to see 70mm being used, even if it isn't perhaps quite to the standard enjoyed by previous generations. If there are any updates as people in the know educate me further, I shall update you in future videos. As it stands though, to see a genuine 70mm print today, it looks like we are going to have to hope to see an old print re-released into the few cinemas that are still able to screen them. There haven't been many of them since the introduction of low-fade stocks in 1982, but the re-release of Lawrence of Arabia in 70mm from 1989 would probably be a good place to start. And in that regard, just along from the Odeon, the Prince Charles is keeping the film flag flying. Plenty of 70mm and 35mm is getting screened here, so it's worth keeping an eye on their website. More good news is that the former Leicester Square Theatre, or Odeon West End as it was later known, has reappeared after years of being just a hole in the ground. It's no longer likely to be anything special, but at least an historic cinema location has returned. My favourite all-time cinema was the Empire, but today sadly the Empire is no longer the special picture palace it once was. A 1989 THX refit transformed this venue into the greatest event cinema around, but today Empire 1 has been divided into two studios, one being a faux IMAX and the other a half-size auditorium. At least it survived though, as this was the venue of the first ever cinema screening in the UK, 1895 I think. The Warner West End is now a view. Warner gave it a major rebuild in 1993 and it reopened with Harrison Ford in The Fugitive. Unfortunately no one at the ticket desk knew then which of the 9 studios were the best, but we quickly ascertained the 2 THX auditoriums were 5 and 7, perhaps they still are today. There are plenty of other historic cinemas in the vicinity of Leicester Square, but not nearly as many as there once were. Who recognises this one though, which you may have spotted in Last Night in Soho, with the 1965 Thunderbolt poster emblazoned on the frontage. This is on Haymarket and part of the Empire chain today. But perhaps the most impressive screening you will get anywhere in Britain today is just outside of the West End, on the other side of Waterloo Bridge. But take the time to walk down there, because the middle of Waterloo Bridge has one of the best cityscape views in the world. The City of London is over to the east and the Houses of Parliament is over to the west. And then at the end of the bridge, within the roundabout itself, is the great BFI IMAX with a screen 90 feet wide. There really is little point in going to one of the faux IMAX theatres if you're in the London vicinity. BFI stands for British Film Institute, and I was a member of the BFI for many years whilst living in central London, primarily for access to the National Film Theatre, located under Waterloo Bridge. It's another one that's worth keeping an eye on for special screenings and events. There is one other location worth bringing to your attention, and as mentioned in my last video, Fopp, which is perhaps the greatest video and music store in the country. It's called Fopp Covent Garden, and its address is 1 Earlham Street, but it's easy to find as it's just up Shaftesbury Avenue, about 50 yards east of Cambridge Circus. My next video will be a tour of this fabulous shop, which, being as it's right in the centre of London and just up from Leicester Square, anyone visiting London can put it on their to-do list. Beware though, you'll walk in oak, but walk out broke. Until the next video, bye bye for now.